Hey, welcome back. I hope you're enjoying this tutorial series on making a Simon game. Why did I pick a Simon game? Well, the Simon game is a pretty simple game to make. It's got some really simple rules, and I think it's easy to kind of follow along and create for people who've never made a game before. So I feel like this is a good kind of introductory game to make. Most programming projects start with something like a say hi to the world program that just kind of introduces you to printing to the screen. This game gives you a feel for really simple AI or a computer player and interaction from an actual player using really any kind of input: touch, mouse, keyboard, joystick, just about anything. This could be easily translated to a mobile device or to a web-based game or to a desktop game. Granted, it's not the most exciting game in the world, but it's a good seed for all sorts of other kinds of games. And a lot of the techniques you use here you can translate to other games. So here, this is where we left off. You have these 4 buttons, and again, the buttons are objects that can be duplicated, and you can really have as many of these as you want. You could write a script that just generated a bunch of buttons and they'd all respond. So you could have a grid of 4x4, 8x8. You could have a grid of just as many buttons as you wanted. So anyways, this tutorial is going to focus on why I chose to make the classes I did. So if we look down here at our scripts directory, you can see I have a button script, I have a player script, and a Simon script, or you could say Simon class, player class, and button class. Well, a really good technique I learned from watching videos like Derek Banas and just kind of over the years of working in object-oriented programming, which is not the easiest concept to learn if you've never programmed before, especially if you've never worked with an object-oriented programming language like C#. One of the good tricks is to write out the flow of whatever project you're working on. In this case, we're going to call this a Simon game. So I'm just using the Notepad in Windows 10. And I'm going to write down the basic rules. So the first thing that happens is Simon takes a turn by picking a series of random buttons. The next thing that happens is that the player repeats the buttons Simon chose. Next thing that happens is that Simon chooses more buttons at a faster pace. And then again, the player repeats the button pattern. And if the player doesn't repeat the pattern exactly, then the game starts over. Okay, that's pretty basic, pretty straightforward. There are kind of 5 steps here, and really this one is just repeat, so really there are 4 steps. So we can kind of look through this list here. I'll go ahead and bold this, maybe underline it, make it look nice. We can look through this list and we can look for nouns, which helps us define what classes we should make. So Simon is a noun. That's one of the players. That's the computer player. So we'll go ahead and say there's going to be a Simon class. What other classes will there be? Let's see, the player. That's another class. Let's see, class. What else? Player repeats the buttons. Simon picks a series of random buttons. So the buttons is another class, or button class. And then there's something that's implied here in this whole thing, which is up here, the Simon game, or the game class. So you can say game class. So the game class is basically the collection of all of these instructions. It's a class that defines how the rules work in this game. So you can see here I've basically got a list of 4 different classes, and as you can see, as we've worked through the first 3 videos in this tutorial series, we've developed 3 of these classes already: the Simon class, the player class, the button class, and the game class is something we have yet to develop. It doesn't hurt to write a basic description of what these these classes might do. This class picks a series of random buttons. You can say number of buttons is variable. Player class picks buttons that match the buttons chosen by Simon class through the fire. Well, let's say through mouse click, something like that. Here we go. The button class, this one receives a hit and reacts to it. Sends that hit to the game class. Register it. And this one determines whose turn it is, records button presses, determines whether player matched Simon's button choices. So you can kind of see here now, as we've written these things out, the number of classes we're going to write is 4 classes. There are basically 5 steps to the game, and this is kind of a little description of what each class is going to do. And we can start using this to build out a UML diagram, which would help us in developing our classes. Some of the things we might want to figure out is what does the game class do when it determines whose turn it is? So the game class might have a reference to Simon and to the player, and then it might have an integer that determines whose turn it is. Like 0 could be Simon and 1 could be the player. And every time Simon goes, it increments the integer. Every time the player goes, it sets the integer back to 0, so it knows whose turn it is. So these are some of the things you can think about when you're starting to architect your project. And I think in this case, the most beneficial exercise here is writing out the rules and looking for the nouns and trying to figure out what classes need to be made. Basically, what objects are going to be represented in code in your game world. And as you've seen here in the past few videos, we were able to reproduce these classes. Again, we did this without really planning anything, but we created these classes based on what we thought we'd need, and I think it pretty much resembles what we just diagrammed there. So I was able to diagram it after just kind of thinking about it for a moment or two, because again, this game is pretty simple. When you have a more complicated application, writing out the steps might be a lot more complicated. But if you start with just a instruction or flow, a flow diagram, you can start to see exactly what you'll need. Okay, so this is going to be just a really short tutorial video. I'm going to move on to developing the Simon game in the next tutorial. But I hope this little exercise helped you in understanding kind of how to start developing an architecture for your game and figuring out what needs to be a script or a class of its own. All right, I'll see you in the next one.